A good father is a leader who plants the seeds for his family's future. Reed Markham, professor of communications. All right. Good morning. Welcome to another episode of the Liberty Dad podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. I'm your host, DL, America's most objective libertarian. If you're tuning in live, I want to especially thank you for giving me your time so early. All right, folks. Today is another episode of Dad Talk. This is where we step away from the politics and we talk about something. I do one of two things. I either have a dad on, and then we talk about what is important to him as a dad, or I talk about stuff that dads can relate to, right? This is kind of like my way of just kind of giving back to dads. And the whole purpose of this series on Fridays is I want to raise dad voices. That's it. It's really that simple. Now, you might say, well, what kind of led you to this? I don't think that men, fathers in particular, get the respect that they should in society. Now, you might say, "Well, DL, look at all these dads who abandon their children." Okay, so let's back up a little bit. I think that fathers in general don't have the reputation that they should. How do you get a reputation? You get a reputation by your actions. I think there are plenty of fathers out there that are great dads, great husbands. Are there bad ones? Yes. And those guys, I'm not trying to elevate. I am trying to elevate the ones who do a good job. And a lot of people kind of mistake elevating one voice by beating up on another. It's kind of like to say, "Oh man, look at all these terrible women out there, blah blah blah." And I'm like, that's not really raising a voice. That's just beating somebody else down. And so that now that if you can beat this person down below you, well, then your voice is now elevated. That's not how we work here. We raise dad voices in a productive and meaningful way because basically what I want to see is more of the good stuff, less of the bad. So we raise the good voices and we say there are still many good men out there who are great fathers and great husbands. Now I focus on dads because I am a dad and well, this is Liberty Dad show, right? So it kind of makes sense. But you can apply these even if you're not a dad. And in some ways, if you're a mom, you can apply these as well. Things may be different because sometimes there are differences between the sexes. But for the most part, a lot of this stuff is transferable or still a value add to the ladies out there. So that's what I do. So today, I want to talk about leading as a husband and a father. And I got two videos that I'm going to show you, and we're going to talk about them. Now, first, before I get into that, I do want to point out this particular episode gonna be a little bit shorter. So I mean, like I know you guys are like, really, really, really. I say that a lot, and then I end up like I'll say, you know what, I'm gonna make this show a half an hour, and then like an hour later, it's no longer a half an hour. But I do believe that this show is actually going to be a little bit on the shorter side, and that's okay. I am keeping up with the stats and the analytics for my Rumble Creator Program, and I need 30 streaming hours regular. Like this is just open to everybody, and I have 28.7, so we're in good shape still. And then I'm supposed to have 5 hours of Rumble Premium that I stream as well. I got 1 hour and I got four more to do. So, and I've got plans for that. And I'll tell you about it in just a second. And then the hours watched this month, that's you, the audience, helping me out. I'm at 174 out of 200 that are required. Now, what are the requirements? How does that work? Well, as of, I believe, by tomorrow noon, I'm supposed to hit all of those goals. And if I hit all of those objectives, then I will be automatically enrolled in the next month of the program. If not, I believe I get booted and I have to start all over, which is fine. Like, hey, I'm going to talk more about this tomorrow, actually. But I just kind of wanted to give you a little quick update on that. So let me back up a little bit. Let me tell you what's going to happen. So this episode is going to be a little bit on the shorter side. I'm just going to talk real briefly, and then um, later this afternoon, during the lunch hour, I'm going to go in depth on a few tweets by my peers up in New Hampshire, the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire. There's always something going on with them folks because they're a bit on the radical side. They're on the radical side just in beliefs, as many libertarians are. They also are a bit on the radical side, much more than most of us, on how they deliver that message. So there are some tweets that I want to address, and I'm not. This is not going to be me beating up on them. Okay, this is me saying, okay, you've presented this information. Here is my counter argument and we will stay completely away from insults and any kind of negative uh, conversation about my peers because I like pretty much most everybody that I think everybody that I know that's up in New Hampshire or most everybody. There's like one or two people where I'm like, yeah, we're not friends. But for the most part, I think there's some good people up there. But we're going to address some of these arguments a little bit later today. So look forward to that. However, now I will say this, that's going to be Rumble Premium. And you might say, well, DLY, well, like I just told you, I needed 4 more hours. That is explicitly Rumble Premium. And so that's going to be one way I do it. The other way that I'm going to do it is tomorrow morning, I'm going to do a special episode. And since it's the last day of the month, and since we're talking about this Rumble Creator Program, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to lay out as much as I can about where like I'm going to talk more about the technical details of this show. And I'm going to tell you about the metrics. I'm going to tell you about some of the things that I've done. I'm going to show you on screen some of my setup so that you can see what I'm working with. So if you are somebody that's like, yeah, I would like to get into podcasting, this might be a show for you. Or if you're just really curious and you're like, how does DL make all this magic work behind the scenes? I'm going to go into that. And so this will be my between those two shows, that'll be my way to get my 4 hours of premium content. Because here's the thing, it's really hard for me to kind of think about topics that are premium versus public because like I want like if I'm telling you something, I want as many people hearing about it. That's the nature of the ideas that I have. I want as many people. On the other hand, I do have some requirements to stay in this program, so I got to think, kind of try to balance and think and say, okay, how do I differentiate what can be public or what, whatever. Because I like if it's an idea that's really good, then I want as many people to hear it. But if you're not a Rumble premium subscriber, then you won't be able to hear it. Right. So I have to make some tough choices. It's time to man up. It's basically what it is. So I'm going to start with those things, and then eventually I will continue figuring out like, okay, how do I incorporate the Rumble Premium, into the program such that I satisfy what I'm looking to accomplish. And that's really what it amounts to. It's like I've got a goal in mind that I want to accomplish, and so it's like, how do I figure that out? So so look forward to that. I think that's going to be. Sorry, I'm distracted here a little bit. That's going to be where that's going to be the way that I accomplish this. And, that didn't even make sense. That didn't even follow. That's going to be the way that I get the last remaining hours in, and also present to you, some hopefully interesting stuff. So we'll see. All right, I'm a little distracted because I was like trying to do some stuff here. So behind the scenes, which tomorrow, if you tune in, you'll be able to see like, oh, okay, when he gets distracted, what is he up to? What is he doing? So all right. Anyway, let's get into this. So there are two videos that came across my feed, and I thought they were very interesting. And so I want to show them to you, and then I want to just kind of give you some of my thoughts on these, because I think they're really awesome. So this first one. It's called we'll call it Father Playtime. And so let's go ahead and play that video. I actually got three videos all together. So let's play that one.
Little boys look to their fathers to see how their fathers regulate their aggression. How does my daddy handle his angry feelings? Fathers have a different reaction than mothers to oxytocin. Throwing the baby up in the air, tickling the baby, chasing the baby around, wrestling with the baby, right? And why is that important? First of all, play is important. And mothers will often say, I can't play, I'm not good at play. Because mothers are better with soothing distress. Fathers are better with play. It's how hormones work. Because the kind of play fathers do with babies is preparing them to separate. It's not yet separating, but it's preparing them. It's also encouraging them to explore, because babies will stay close to mothers. The encouragement to explore the world and take risks, not too many risks, but some risks, and be careful and take risks, is a father's role. Fathers are very important, but they're just different than mothers.
All right. So I agree with that video. Now there was one moment where I actually did have a disagreement, and it's not major. But she said like a lot of women say like I don't know how to play. Um I don't know if that is in itself true. And I wouldn't say that women are not necessarily good at playing. I think that mothers specifically, of course, they play differently. So, the way that there's like there's that meme that you've probably seen, and it's like dad's with his daughter and dad's with his son, right? And so he's got his daughter and he's like, holding her, and maybe he's doing a tea party or something like that, right? Something nice and safe. And then it's like dad's with the son. He's holding him up in the air by one leg, carrying him around, And so I think from my experience and observation that there is a distinct difference when it comes to male and female. Now, a lot of people get mad and they're like, "Oh no, women can do whatever men." Yes, and there are moms out there who will do what you might expect a dad to do. So my own mother was one of them. So, for example, my dad, when I was growing up, I don't remember my dad fixing anything. Like he's just not a tool guy. And that's cool. Like I'm not begrudging him. Like there's no problem here. He's not like I'm not, talking trash behind his back or anything like that. Like that just wasn't his thing. Okay. But it was my mother's thing for sure. If you like today, I have way more tools than my mom had growing up, and my mom thought she was Bob Vila. That's my running joke. Is she thought she was Bob Vila back in the day. She would be like, "All right, we're gonna take out a wall. We're gonna put up a wall. We're gonna take down wallpaper. We're gonna put up wallpaper. We're gonna tile. We're gonna refurnish these hardwood floors. We're going to pull up this carpet. We're going to install a sink. We're gonna build a fence. I mean, like on and on and on. Every one of those that I listed were not made up. There are actually at least one for each one of them instance where that's what my mom dragged me off to do. She's like, all right, we're going to go do this. We're going to go do that. So I learned basically my growing up was shop class with my mom. It was not with my dad. And so to get back to my point, generalizations are legitimate, but they still are generalizations. There are outliers, and the number of outliers, or maybe exceptions is the better term to use. The number of exceptions varies with any generalization, right? So if you generalize about a group of people in case A, that might be the 80% of the people fit that description. But in group B, if you're generalizing something else, it may only be 60%. Okay. And here's the thing about generalizations. In many cases, or stereotypes, kind of the same thing, they don't have to necessarily be the majority. They just have to be enough to stick out in somebody's mind. Okay. So that, and so there's a wide flexibility when it comes to generalizations. So going back, you know, you could find overall in society, there are certain traits that you see more often in fathers than in mothers. But then if you break it down into maybe specific groups, you might start seeing differences among them, right? So you might, and I'm just making this up at this point to illustrate a point. So I don't know that this is the actual, you would actually find this example. But if I were to make an example, I would say, okay, you might find certain traits are more prevalent in men and women overall, and then when you look and say maybe you look at Asian households, and you might find okay, well, in Asian households, these particular traits are much more in men than in women, whereas in maybe white households, they're not as dramatically different between men and women. So I just wanted to kind of lay that out because a lot of people get really tripped up with generalizations and stereotypes. And I think, like a lot of people will go, "Oh yeah, well my dad didn't do that." And it's like, okay, yes, that's how generalizations work. Your dad may not have done that. In fact, the community that you were in might might be more even than some other community, right? That's still possible. But that doesn't change the underlying reality that a generalization and a stereotype exist for a reason. And that reason is generally because it sticks out in people's mind enough, however many that represent that particular idea in a group, that sticks out in people's mind sufficiently to make to give credence to that stereotype. That's what I'm trying to say. So anyway, a little sidetrack there, but I just want to point that out. So back to father playtime. I think, I kind of disagree with that point that she was making where she was like, yeah, a lot of moms don't know how to play. I think moms generally will play differently, right? My mom certainly didn't do certain, things with me that my dad did and vice versa, right? Like I just described. And it's all over the place. And in some cases, they will fit the stereotype. In other cases, they won't. When my wife and I play with my son, we play differently. So I'll give you two examples, and then I'm going to show you an example. So, number one example, my son and I like to kind of talk trash to each other a little bit. Now he's 6, and so the trash talk is still pretty clean. Okay, and as far as I go, I will pretty much always keep it clean. But anyway, um, so we might say, you know, oh, trying to think. Now I'm drawing a blank on some of the things that we actually say to each other. But he might say something like, "Yeah, you're a poop head," or something like that. You would just whatever, you know. And I'll be like, "No, you are." Right. And so we might have this back and forth. And I've talked to him in the past and I've said, "Look, this is something you can say with daddy, not with mommy, because mommy won't like it." And she wouldn't. I know because I know my wife. Right. I know that she's not going to like the trash talk. She's not going to get it. Okay. Because that's not her style of communication. And it's very typical that it's not a style of communication for moms. Again, not all moms. Okay. So, um, so that's one area where we definitely differ. And so I let him, and it's like I'll give you a really good example that I can remember now. Um, I will sometimes be like, "You turd, why are you doing that?" Right? and I'm playfully joking with him, calling him a name. And I've said this before, I do that personally. One, because that's just a style of communication between men, right? It's like if you remember the movie Gran Torino with uh, Clint Eastwood, and he plays this white guy that lives that has these Asian people move in next to him, and he lives in kind of like a neighborhood that's becoming more and more or less and less white, I guess, if you want to put it that way. And so he's got all these attitudes about foreigners and black people and stuff like that. And he comes face to face with them. And he ends up becoming friends with the neighbor boy who was somewhat friends. Like he's kind of like a mentor more. And so he's like, I'm gonna teach you how to be a man. And so they go to the barber shop and he's like, "All right, you watch and we're going to walk in." So he walks in and there's a white guy, he's a barber. Both of them, both of the men are white and the kid is Asian. And he walks in and he starts to kind of it seems like he's insulting the guy. But it's like the adult version of, "What's up, turd? How you doing?" You know? And so that they go in and they say that and then he's like, "All right, now you try it." And the kid comes in and he kind of fumbles it all up and he just basically comes across as insulting to the guy, right? This is a way that men communicate very frequently. Um, I have, on many occasions, used what might be an insult, but not an insult in the moment to my guy friends. But then women that I know who I'm friends with, I don't talk that way, and they don't talk that way with me. So I think that's one way that we can see where men and women, uh, fathers and mothers, differ in how they're going to interact with their children. So one way that I do it is I just we play this little insult, and they're always playful. Like right, we distinguish when somebody's joking and when somebody's not. And I've let him know like, hey, you don't say this to hurt somebody's feelings. We're not trying to be mean. But if we're just poking fun at each other, then yes, we can use some names here and there. And so I'm teaching him. And the reality of it is he's going to have this happen. And so I want him to learn right away as soon as we can the difference between um, saying something in a mean way and saying something in a fun, playful way. The second way, of course, is like the video showed, physical playtime. Now, my wife does not engage in physical playtime in the same way that I do, whereas me and my son might wrestle, we might box each other a little bit, kind of smack each other on the side or whatever, just roughhousing, standard roughhousing. And so, but my wife doesn't play like that. My wife will tickle. She'll play like tickle with him, and she'll be like, "Oh, let's tickle you," and he'll be like, "No, I'm gonna tickle mommy," right? But they don't actively get like aggressive. The aggressiveness is for me, and I've told him, I'm like, "Look, don't do this to mommy because she won't like it, and you will get in trouble." So let me show you the video of my own father playtime that we happen to have, and this was like I don't know 6 months ago. It was, I don't know, it's an old video. But I thought it was kind of fun. So we're gonna play it because it's dad talk, right? And all right. So you see me and him. We got boxing gloves on. All right. Now, obviously, I'm making it easy, or maybe he's just that tough on me. All right. All right. All right. Now you notice that he's taking hard swings and I am not, and I'll talk about that in just a second here. Can you hear the sound of him? Like, all right. So that's the video of my son and I roughhousing. And what's interesting about that is we both have boxing gloves on. It's funny, I actually have his gloves on and he's got our gloves on. Our gloves are weighted, his are not. And let me tell you, when he punches, when he hits me in the head, for a 6-year old or a 5-year old at that time, he's got a nice little punch. Of course, they're weighted as well. So that assists him. But, and I've told him, I'm like, look, you don't you don't play like that with mommy. You don't, s- fight her, that kind of stuff, because that's just not the kind of play that she wants to do. But what's really interesting is I actually let him swing as hard as he wants, and the reason is because he's 6, and I don't want him to like. I think at this age, it's more important that he learns that aggression can be fun, and there are parts of being aggressive in play that are important. For example, sometimes you get a little hurt, and now it's not that I'm punching him and then giving him a bloody nose or anything, because that would be bad. But sometimes, like I might take a slap to his face. Again, we're not. This is like we're not talking like a hard slap. It's not like you're in trouble, and you get slapped. This is a we're playful, and then I give him a little slap to the face. And it was interesting. One day we were roughhousing. Let me see. Oh, okay. Let me back up a little bit. So my son can be a little bit delicate, and so I was like, well, how do we work this delicateness out to the point where he's prepared enough for the world? Okay, now, I think that's the key word: enough for the world. I don't necessarily need him to be super duper tough. Okay. I just need him to be able to be tough enough to handle what he's anticipating on facing. Or if something happens, he doesn't cower down into a ball. That's also a reason why we take him to jujitsu lessons so that he can learn this kind of stuff. Um, and so I noticed that he was what I would consider to be a bit delicate, you know? And I was like, well, how do I work this out? And then I got this idea. I was like, maybe we just need to have some rough housing. Maybe he needs to learn that, sometimes you get hurt and you get up and you move on. And the reason that I want this lesson is like, imagine he's out playing with some kids and he falls down and he scrapes his knee a little bit. Now, if it's not too bad of a scrape, then he should just basically get up, throw some dirt on it, and move on. Maybe not throw dirt on it, but you get the point, right? Like just, hey, okay, I acknowledge my scrape. No big deal. I'll keep playing. That's what I want when it's appropriate, and it's a judgment call, right? Like, how do you do that? But I want him to be able to do that at least some of the time. And so, um, we were playing one day, and whatever happened, it was I accidentally hit him a little bit too hard. Not hard, not real hard. I mean, there's no marks, like, but enough where it caught his attention and it caught my attention. Then I made a mistake. I stopped and I said, "Oh, are you okay?" And looking back, because it all happened really quickly, but looking back, I realized that when I said that, I ruined the momentum. The momentum was going to be where he just kept going, but I ruined it by acknowledging and basically saying, "Hey, you got hit too hard. Do you need to think about this?" Right? That's kind of how it comes out. That's kind of what he hears, where I'm just like, "Hey, are you okay?" And then all of a sudden he started crying. And I said, "No, no, 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 don't cry." And this was just out of nowhere. I was like, "No, no, no, don't cry." And so then I was like, and I just kind of went back at playing at him. And then he diverted his attention back and immediately jumped back into fighting, if you will. And so then we could, and I was like, and that's when I had this aha moment. I was like, oh, that's how we do this, right? Through actual experience, and it's controlled experience, right? In a way where he's not actually hurt. Now, what's really interesting, I mentioned the jujitsu lessons. The coach that he and then we had the coach on here, and we were talking because he's a dad as well, and I had him on Dad Talk a while back. But what was very interesting that I've observed of the class is that the coach will tell the children, he will say, "You are not made of glass. If you fall down, sometimes you get a little hurt, and you got to get back up." Right? And he's reinforces, and he does such a great job. Like he's way better at it than I would be. I can tell you that much. And it's very interesting. And that's the lesson that I want for my son, because if he's out, if he's out playing and he gets seriously injured, yeah, that's a time to call for somebody, call for help, call mommy, daddy, whatever. If he falls down and just gets a small scrape, because he's 6, he doesn't know any better yet. He needs to learn, okay, this one I can just get up and keep moving. Maybe he gets up and just keeps moving and just disregards it altogether. Maybe he gets up and kind of just, man, gosh, and then, takes a moment and then continues on. Or maybe it's a really serious deal. And then he's like, all right, I got to go home, call for my, parents, whatever, an adult. And so those are the lessons that I want. Those lessons aren't really going to come from mom, not generally. Those are lessons that dads teach them. So this is a lesson and so we have to be mindful of, like, as dads, how do we communicate this message? How do we teach our sons to be resilient. Okay. And that's probably the better term rather than tough, because tough kind of gives this impression like, you got this stiff upper lip and maybe you should be shedding a tear, but you're just refusing. That's not really the lesson I'm looking for. I don't need him to not cry per se, but rather make an in the moment decision and say, this is a big deal. This is not a big deal, right? That's the kind of decision I need him to be able to make. And sometimes you have to do it quickly and you have to say, okay, what am I, yep, I just got hurt. Is it a big deal? It's not. It stings a little bit. Give me a few minutes to time out, right? Like I had that happen plenty of times. I remember playing football with some guys, and we were playing tackle football. And one dude, he liked to play rough. He just did, and he came and he literally clotheslined me and then dropped me to the ground. My elbow went into my ribs. I was like out of breath. I was like, and he's like, "Come on, man, you can keep playing." I was like, "Yeah." I was like, I'm like, I go catch my breath, because like I couldn't breathe, and I'm like, like I want to play too, man, but like, give me a second, right? And then I did go back to playing, despite the fact that I got taken down. I just tried to learn to be faster, by the way, since I was always because when you're tiny and when you're scrawny like me, you're roughhousing with bigger dudes like or you're playing tackle football, you don't want to be tackled because the big guys do play rough and it's getting tackled when you're running away from them, and that can be rough. But anyway, so I think that first video kind of encompasses this idea of like, what do men need to teach their children, right? We need to teach them to be resilient. Now, I think the way that you teach a girl to be resilient and the way that you teach a boy can be different, but not always. Like, like if I had a daughter, let's say I had a son and a daughter roughly the same age, right? One's 5, one's 6 per se. And I'm roughhousing with one and then like my son. And then let's say that a daughter, which again, just pointing out, I don't have one. But if I had a daughter and she came up and she was like, I want a roughhouse too, we would. Now, might we roughhouse a little bit lighter? Maybe, right? Like, am I gonna? Would there be videos of me necessarily, tapping her in the head with a boxing glove? Maybe. It depends, right? In this particular case, I would judge that based on what does she want? What is she? What are her limits? Right. So if I know that my son's limits are more, he has better limits. I don't say better, but his limits are further away than the daughter's, then we're going to tailor it to the daughter when we're all three playing and say, hey, like, look, remember, this is your sister now, right? But also include her as well, because I think this is, it's a dad's job to lead the entire family. And part of leadership is understanding the personalities and the desires of everybody that's in the household. And so this is why I'll say, like, don't play with your mommy like this. Don't talk like this with your mommy, but you can with me. Don't talk like this at school necessarily with your friends. You might get in trouble. At home, if you call daddy a turd, not going to get in trouble if we're playing, right? Or pretty much anytime for the most part. But if you say it at school, chances are you might get in trouble just because they're not going to look at it and say, oh, okay, it's just boys being boys. Whether they should or not, it's a different story, but they're not. So, right. So I'm teaching him like you have to judge based on your environment and you have to evaluate who you are with and what interaction is appropriate with that person. These are all leadership lessons I'm teaching my son. If I had a daughter, I would teach them to her very much in a similar way. Might be different. Or if I only had a daughter, then those lessons might come across a little bit differently. Right. And of course, I would do different things. I might do more tea parties than wrestling. Whereas I would, with my son, I'm not going to do any tea parties, but I'll wrestle. But he might pretend to be, a waiter or a cook one day. And which he has. And he's like, all right, dad, here's your food, blah, blah, blah. And, thank you, sir, blah, blah. Can I have some more? So it's not really tea time. It's more like, chef time, I guess. But you get the point. You see what I mean? This is how dads lead. Now, I want to talk about, yeah, that's funny. Um, uh, Kagela says, saying that boys are different than girls will get the woke mob upset at you. This is a good thing. I agree. And I am not afraid of the woke mob. They can be mad all they want. I will just send them memes, stay mad or something like that. Cause I like, hey, reality is reality. Okay. And at the end of the day, what I'm trying to do is to say, be a positive voice and uplift men and challenge men, to be the best father that they can be. That's my goal. I want to be the best father that I can be. And then in that process, I'm going to try to influence as many men as I can to be the best father they can be. And then influence women to say, look, this is the expectation that I have of, my husband who is now a father or my future husband who will be a father, so on and so forth. I think that's the message that I'm trying to communicate. And the woke mob, they can stuff it. That's what I'll say about that. All right, so let's get to that next video here. So this is the last video that I have, and so this is interesting because I actually never thought of this, and when I saw it, I was immediately like, yeah, yeah, yes. So let's play this, and we'll see what kind of caught me by surprise.
Little boys look to their
Oops,
fathers to see how their fathers
hold on,
regulate their aggression.
hold on. That's not what I wanted. What happened here? That already. Let's see here. Do. There. I think I accidentally grabbed the wrong one.
When they had a
There we go.
conflict with their mom, if they came into sharp conflict and were yelling or screaming at their mom, I would often say, "Hey, you don't talk to my wife that way."
Oh. Now this threw me off because we normally hear, "Don't talk to your mother," but he said, "Don't talk to my wife that way." So now I want you to hear his explanation because I think it was really phenomenal.
Okay, so you changed the verbiage. I changed the verbiage. Okay. Because I wanted to impress on them that, yeah, she's your mom, and I need to teach you about respect for your mother, and we'll talk about that. Yeah. But first and foremost, if you're going to be aggressive towards the woman that God has given to me, I'm her fiercest protector, and you're not up against her anymore. You're up against her husband. And that's teaching them that down the road too, like, you got to be that for your wife. And you should expect that from every man who's married to a woman, that he's going to defend his wife. And so there's a difference to the relationship now. Yeah. Right. So it created a boundary. My wife and I knew we were winning when one time our son was really angry at her about something. And she said, "Well, talk to dad about it then." And his response was, "No, I'm not going to talk to dad. He always takes your side." Yep. My wife was like, "We win."
All right. So I agree. I think that is a phenomenal way to look at it. And I'm actually going to start incorporating that as well. And I agree with the rationale why he said it. Like, you're teaching your children that there is a certain expectation, a certain dynamic that is expected between a husband and a wife. And that goes toward not only how do you treat your mom, but how do you treat somebody else's wife in the future? And then on top of that, how will you behave with your own wife? And so I thought, like, and so these are the kind of lessons that I think are invaluable to kids, because part of our job as parents is literally to set the expectation so that when they get older, that's how they behave. And I think this is, and I'm going to kind of deviate just a wee bit. I think that plays a role when we talk about, like, when you have people talking about, like, being against spanking, people that are like, I'm a peaceful parent, or I'm a what is it, this peaceful parenting. There's also there's a couple variations of it. But it's basically where you don't spank your kids and you find some other way. Now, I've talked about it before. In my opinion, spanking isn't entirely off the table. However, I do see it as very rudimentary, and I think you are the better parent when you say, I do not want to hit my kid. I don't even like to yell at my own son, but he will get yelled at if I have to. Um, and the reason is because what I want is I want him to grow up and learn the lessons that he needs to learn, and learn to be a good productive member of society. And if I can do that without hitting him, why not? Like, why wouldn't you? And I think the bigger reason that most people believe in spanking is because they believe without it, that you cannot raise a child that way. And so I think they kind of have in their mind, they've envisioned this idea of the celebrity's really spoiled child who has never gotten in trouble for anything, and they talk back to everybody and they're really rude. And so they have that picture in their mind, and then they're like, okay, well, I would rather, and so they make a decision. They would say they would rather spank their kid than to have their kid turn out that way. But I think that lessons like this, right? This is how you kind of lay the foundation for teaching them things without necessarily having to resort to physical violence, which effectively is what spanking is. Let's be honest, right? It is physical violence. Um, and so if the lesson is don't talk to my wife that way, then they learn early on there is a special relationship between a man and his wife, right? And that relationship, they first learn, okay, I, as a child, cannot come in between that. Okay, and this dovetails really nicely with siding with each other, presenting a unified front, which is like what my wife and I do. And like my mom and my dad would do that too. Like I would go and say, "Mom, can I do this?" And first thing out of her mouth would be, "What'd your dad say?" Or if I went and I asked my dad, he'd be like, "What'd your mom say?" Right? Or sometimes they would just defer to the other person. They would say, "Go ask your mom, go ask your dad." Right? But it was like almost always the first words out of their mouth were had something to do with the other parent. Right? And that said to me, these two are on a unified front together. They are they are basically one entity effectively, and I'm not going to be able to divide and conquer them. And that's a good lesson. And I think that this don't talk to my wife like that. One, it does a couple of things. Number one, it shows, hey, there's a special relationship, as I just said, between a man and his wife, and this is what you should end up growing up to be like. But I think it also then communicates the message that I said earlier, which there are different contexts under which things happen, right? So, yes, there is the don't talk to my wife that way, but there's also don't talk to your mom that way. And those are two different things, right? Because those are two different lessons that you have, and they're coming at the same time. And there's different context because someday my son will grow up and presumably he will have his own wife. And when he does, he may or may not have kids. But if let's just say he doesn't have kids or before he has kids, he's going to need to know I'm not allowing people to speak to my wife in a certain way. And then it reciprocates, right? So this is where I said earlier, like some of these lessons that I talk about are good for women as well. Well, this also would reiterate and reinforce that he should expect his wife to do the same thing, to say, "Don't talk about my husband like that." And, like, I can tell you right now, if somebody were talking trash about me, my wife would be like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, you better back up," right? Now, if they were, giving honest critique or something, she might be like, "Yeah, that's true." Like, if they were like, "Man, your husband talks a lot, right?" She's not gonna be like, "Don't you talk about my." She'll be like, "Yeah, he does. That's why he's got a podcast because he just yeah, 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 yeah," right? So ultimately, I think these are the good lessons that we can get from from these videos and that we can think about. But I was particularly interested in this one where it's like, don't talk to my wife that way, um, because I do want my son to grow up and I want him to treat his wife in a particular way. I want him to marry a woman that's going to treat him in a particular way. And I think starting that lesson at 6 is a great one. And then it also reinforces what he observes, right? So if I don't let if I come into this marriage as I'm not going to allow someone to talk to my wife in a certain, in certain ways, that's going to go for my children. That's going to go for somebody outside of the family, right? So then what happens is when I tell my son, don't talk to my wife that way, he learns that lesson. And then if we're out and about and somebody is talking to my wife in a poor way, and I go, whoa, don't talk to my wife that way, right? Now he sees it, right? So now it gets reinforced because He got to experience it, and then he got to observe somebody else experiencing it. And so, therefore, he starts getting it in his mind. This is how a man acts. So when he gets older, he'll go through a stage where maybe he doesn't do that. But when he gets older, this will all these lessons will come back to him. And then if I've done well, I will have raised him to behave in a way that is a productive member of society, a good man, a good father, a good husband. And ultimately that's what I want. So, and hopefully this all makes sense to you, right? I brought up a number of different points. I kind of went in slightly different directions, just briefly, but hopefully, I brought it back, well enough so that it makes the point. As a man who is a husband and a father, your job is to lead, and leading happens in all kind of ways. It's not just disciplinary. In fact, it starts long before discipline. Discipline really of any kind, whether you spank or you scold or you put them in timeout, whatever the case is, discipline really is supposed to reinforce the lessons that you've already demonstrated, that you've already been showing them and living, by living, right? That's what it's supposed to do. So if you're relying on discipline to be the lessons, then I think you've made a mistake. The lessons can be reinforced like, hey, we're playtime. You play rough with daddy, but don't play rough with mommy, right? And that teaches the lesson. What lesson is that? Well, one, there's multiple. One, certain people don't like to play rough. Two, hey, you know what? Maybe girls tend not to want to play rough. Now, it's not a guarantee, and as he gets older, he'll learn that he might have a friend in the future who's a girl who's a tomboy, and that's cool. And maybe they'll roughhouse a little bit, and that's fine. I have no issue. But he also may have a friend who's a girl who's not a tomboy, and so he will learn this friend I don't roughhouse with. That's the lesson he's getting right now. When he gets older, and society is a little different for him, he will learn like, hey, maybe I talk to a guy like this, but I don't talk to a woman like that. Maybe I'm a little bit more prepared to get into an altercation with a man, less so with a woman. Hopefully he doesn't have to have that lesson, but you never know, right? So these are the kind of things that I want him to learn. And then I want him to say, okay, we don't talk to somebody's wife this way. We don't talk to somebody's mother this way. We don't talk to somebody's sister this way. All those, they're basically the same, right? It's the same idea. And yeah, you could say this is a little sexist if you're one of the woke mob, and you might say, men and women should be treated equally. Well, you might be right, but I think you're wrong. And my observation is that most women would agree with me. They would say, I don't want to be roughhoused with. I don't want to have a back and forth exchange like some guys do, where they walk in and they're like, "Sup, bitch?" Right? Like that's how I might talk to my guy friends, but I wouldn't talk that way to my to women that I know that are friends with. Right? Like that's just not how they want to be talked to like that. And my experience is that most women don't want to be talked to. So while the woke mob may want to come after me, they can piss off, because at the end of the day, I'm following what I've observed and seen and experienced. And that's what I'm going to talk about. And at the end of the day, I think my ideas will raise better adults. And then hopefully I can communicate to other parents and they can help set the expectations for their children. Also, by the way, the learning never stops, because the whole don't talk to my wife, brand new to me. Never heard of it. Never thought of it until I saw that video. And I was just like, whoa, that's pretty neat. All right, folks, that's my show for today. I did end up managing to be a little bit shorter. I got to the one comment, or to the comment in the there's two comments actually. So let me get to this last one here. I guess it says, it sounds like our watching live does not count, whereas the phone. No, it does count. Any watch hours does count. So if you watch live, that goes toward my watch hours. And then, but I'm not sure how. Like, I don't have a good behind the scenes, and so like sometimes when I look, it'll show like this many people watching, and then later, once the time gets recalculated, it doesn't seem that way. So maybe there's a discrepancy between like some of the numbers I see while it's live, and then some of the the metrics that I see after the fact. I don't really know. It's unclear, but also I know that sometimes, like if somebody tunes in, that might count toward the number of people that tuned in. But if they don't stay tuned in, then obviously that's not going to go very far with my watch hours. So it's quite it's a little bit unclear to me exactly. But no, the live hours are watching it live does count toward the watch hours, as does watching it after the fact. And then, as I learned after getting into the program, it would seem that if you watch even older episodes, that counts as well. So if you want to go back and you want to watch an episode that you didn't see, I would very much appreciate it, and get me those hours, because right now I'm sitting at 174 out of 200, and so hopefully we will make that 200, which I believe has to be made by tomorrow at noon. So anyway, so I'm going to get off here. Next show will be coming up somewhere around 11:30, I think. Look forward to that. It might be 12, but we'll see. And but somewhere around there. So keep an eye out. And until then, I'm out. Thank you for watching, and I hope you found this episode informative and inspiring. Be sure to catch me Monday through Friday, 7:30 a.m. for an informed discussion on politics and culture. Make sure that you're subscribed to my YouTube channel, or if you prefer my Rumble channel, you can go to youtube.libertydad.com, or you can go to rumble.libertydad.com. While you are there, let me know how I'm doing by leaving me a comment. You can also become part of the community by heading over to libertydad.locals.com. Remember, if you're a champion of liberty, your business is people and your product is liberty. I want you to have a great week. Catch you next time. But for now, I'm out.